So this took place back when I was a kid. I can't remember what year it was though, but I'll just say it was 2007 or something like that. This was at a horse camp like a long time ago, and obviously it's pretty fun. You get to ride horses and do lots of fun activities. I personally really like that stuff. It was definitely a lot of fun. I would believe I was around maybe 8 or 9 years old when I went to a summer horse camp. While on the summer horse camp, though, there was one day where I did a trail ride. I believe it might have been on a Friday. I can't remember what day we went on a trail ride, but it was a really nice trail ride. I personally really enjoyed it. It was definitely a really fun one. I was on a horse, which I think her name was Cheyenne, and we went through a luscious forest. There was a lot of forest and stuff, and of course it went on for miles. There was some wildlife, some bears and deer, etc. I was on the horse in the middle of the path of horses, since there were more other kids riding with me. So yeah, it was a little crowded, but I didn't really mind it that much. Now, now it was on a Friday, and the coach of the horse barn area decided that we would go on a trail ride since it was a nice day, and now we've been doing so well at riding for the last few days. Now, we started to go on this trail by loading everybody up, and we followed a path with the coach. The coach was name was Kathy, and she pretty much led the way, and of course some camp counselors were behind us to make sure that we were okay and to make sure we didn't get hurt, etc. As we were going through the luscious forest, we all of a sudden heard what sounded like crying. I looked over, but I couldn't hear if it was one of the camp kids or not, but it didn't sound like any of the camp kids. In fact, I looked over and saw that there was no one there, but I've been hearing this crying getting a little louder. Now, we went through the path where the crying was coming from, and it was getting a little louder than usual. That's when Kathy told us to stay there with the group, as she would go and investigate on her own. One of the camp counselors went with her, but since I didn't really remember too much from the camp, I just stayed put with my horse, not sure of what to do. As I waited for a bit, I began to think of maybe someone could have gotten hurt or possibly a lost child. It was really hard to say what was the main reason of the crying. That's when Kathy ended up coming back the way she came and said, we'll go a different route, since the route she normally takes camp kids on, apparently the crying was on a loop. Of course, she explained that, but I didn't really understand too much from that. But I began to be wiser when I got older as to what it was. I have a feeling that somebody probably pretended to have someone cry just to try to lure people into the woods. I don't know if they were going to kill people, rob us, or do God knows what. But still to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we went in those woods any further. God only knows what would have happened, but at the same time, I was young and didn't understand too much, but the camp counselors only give a little detail. But since now that I'm older now, I've became more wiser as to what really happened. I don't even know if this was ever resolved by the cops or not, but I like to think that it did. But that place was shut down sometime when I turned 10. That still really confuses me, but also shocks me to this day. So this happened to one of my friends back in 2012 when she was about maybe 12 years old at the time. Now, the name of the protagonist of this story, I'm going to call her by the name Edith. Edith loved doing day camps, and she had been going there for many years. She never once had a problem with anything, and she really enjoyed the camp very much. One of the days when she went to camp, she ended up having an incident that she barely even talks about it nowadays, mainly because she wants to forget about it. But every once in a while, she would talk about this experience that happened to her at summer camps. Now, to give it a bit of context, Edith was at an overnight day camp, which she didn't mind that much since she loved it. She was at a camp with a bunch of kids, and they basically were having a lot of fun. They basically did lots of things like hiking, swimming, etc. However, Edith ended up looking over to see that the cabins were pretty nice. They weren't really the best, nor the worst, but they definitely weren't that bad. They were definitely decent to her liking. As of this, she really enjoyed it, and she ended up looking over the cabins and ended up having a great time. She never once had an issue, but ever since this story, she doesn't really know what to believe. Now, it was taking place on one of the cabins when she noticed something was weird. The first night there, she was just basically lying down, not really doing too much. Then she ended up looking over to see that there was actually a picture at the door. This was at her cabin, and she ended up looking, and it said her name on it with X's and O's. Curious as to what it was, she wasn't sure, but she thought that maybe it could have been a prank from one of the camp kids. She asked them, and they said they hadn't done it, so this actually confused her a lot more. Who was the one behind this? She obviously had no idea, but she thought that maybe it could have been the camp counselors, but none of the camp counselors were doing it either. They ended up deciding to keep an eye out in case if there was somebody in the area who were trying to pull pranks or do something really terrible. Edith was watched by all the camp counselors just for a safety precaution in case if someone were really trying to kidnap her or do God knows what. She was just minding her own business doing arts and crafts when she ends up looking over to see that there was a man. This man happened to be looking in through one of the buildings of the place, and she ended up alerting the camp counselors. One of the camp counselors went around about back, but they couldn't see the man anymore, and they didn't see him. Obviously, Edith thought that maybe she was just hearing things, but she doesn't really know what to believe. She obviously doesn't even know what to do, but she obviously was unsettled by this. She ended up going back to her cabin one day late. It was later in the night, probably around 8 p.m. since she wasn't feeling well. As she went to the back, she ended up looking over to see that there was actually someone walking around the cabin. She ended up being unnerved by this, so Edith decided to have a look. Once she ended up stepping out, she ended up hearing what sounded like a laugh. It sounded so raspy that she couldn't even recognize it. She knew it wasn't the camp counselors or any of the kids, so she ended up locking herself in the cabin and stayed there for a while. As she stayed there, she ended up praying to God and hoped that man would go away. He kept continuing to walk around the cabin, not doing too much, but saying things like, come out, wherever you are, to, I know you're in there. Obviously, Edith didn't want to speak or squeal or scream, didn't want to alert that this man was trying to get in. She ended up hiding somewhere in the cabin as best she could, but as she was still staying there, she ended up hearing what sounded like some shouting. She ended up hearing shouting, and it turns out to be one of the camp counselors. It apparently was the camp counselors that noticed this man, and this man ended up taking off into the woods. The police were called, and of course Edith came out of the cabin. She was in tears. She obviously never had been so terrified in her life. Apparently the camp counselors caught the man, but of course he ran out into the forest. The camp was closed after the sleep out, and that's when the kids were pretty much confused. They were confused as to why this man was around and what was his intentions, but of course, the police investigated the area, but they couldn't find the man. Edith doesn't even know if this man is still out there or not, but she liked to think that maybe this man is somewhere out there, probably doing something, but at the same time, she doesn't even want to know if that man was ever still there or not. She would like to think that maybe this man was caught and maybe got the help that he needs, but she is not really sure about that. They never got an update about the man, and he was never seen again at that campsite. So it was closed for a year after that incident, but then it reopened up, but Edith never went to summer camps again due to that incident. Like, not overnight ones, but she really do get paranoid thinking someone was around. She kept thinking that maybe this man would somehow find his way back and trying to get her again. What was his intentions with her? She doesn't even know. It still really frightens her to this day, and she still gets paranoid whenever nobody locks the doors or whatever. That's why now she doesn't really go alone too much, knowing that the world is a dangerous place and no one knows who is safe and who isn't. That really still frightens her to this day, knowing that this man probably had some really not good intentions. What was his intentions with her? She doesn't even know. She doesn't even have no idea who he was. It still scares her to this day, and she doesn't really like to talk about it. But every once in a while she brings it up. It still terrifies her to this day, and she wonders, what was this man gonna do if he had broken in their cabin? God only knows what could have been if he had succeeded. Now this took place back when I did summer camp. It was around the time where I did horse camp. I think this took place around sometime in the summer of 2007 or 2006. I can't really remember which year it took place in, but it definitely took place on one of those years. Now, I was in a camp with a bunch of other kids that did horseback riding and some other activities. It was definitely fun. I really enjoyed it a lot ever since I was a kid. I really enjoyed doing day camps. However, one of these times was definitely really frightening. I think it could have been maybe 2006, but I honestly don't remember what year this took place in. This was around the middle of the night, I think on the second night. When I was needing to use the bathroom, I got up and let the counselors know I was going to use the bathroom, and they said to me just to come straight back afterwards and bring a flashlight. I brought a flashlight, and I started to go down this path that led to the bathroom. As I took that path down, I ended up hearing what sounded like someone walking in the woods. I obviously looked around, but I couldn't see anybody, and I know none of the camp counselors would be up, and neither would the kids. I continued to walk through the forest, and I eventually got to the bathroom where I went in to use the bathroom. After I finished using the bathroom, I ended up cleaning myself up, and when I walked out, I looked over to see that there was no one in there, but I felt the presence around me, as if I was being watched. I looked around the woods, but I couldn't see anybody. Even with the flashlight pointing, I still couldn't see if there was anyone around. Then about maybe 10 feet or so away, I looked over to see that there was a giant mass. Obviously, its eyes were hanging from the ground, and it looked like about maybe 10 feet tall. At first, I thought, as a kid, that it could have been a bear, but that possibility had problems as well, as no bear was about that tall. I ended up pointing my flashlight at it, realizing that that was definitely no bear. It definitely looked to be a 10-foot tall gorilla creature. I thought it was going to lunge at me and attack me, but instead it ended up turning around and running back in the opposite direction, making a horrifying sound. At this point, I was nearly shitting myself, unsure if I should just stay put or I go back to the cabin myself. I ended up running back up to the cabin without even stopping until I got to my cabin. Once I got to my cabin, I ended up closing the door and making sure it was locked. One of the camp counselors was going to check on me and make sure I was okay, as I had been gone a little bit longer than usual. I told her that I saw something in the forest, and she asked me what it was, and I told her exactly what the creature was, even with the best description possible. At first, she thought that I could have been making something up, but she told me that whatever it was definitely a creature. She didn't even know what it was, and neither did I at the time. So the next day, we ended up looking to see there was some footprints right around near the back of the cabin. It obviously really confused us as to who these footprints were, and they definitely didn't look like a bear, and it didn't look like a person. Whatever it was definitely probably had something to do with that gorilla thing that I saw in that night. I don't even know to this day if it was a person. I don't even know if it was Bigfoot. But all we know is that there is always a mystery of stuff that we cannot be explained. And even in the nature, there's things that cannot be explained.